Now, it is extremely challenging for big dudes to find ultralight sleeping pads for use in the backcountry for 3 reasons. Number 1, size. The bigger you are, the bigger the pad needs to be. And the bigger the pad gets, the heavier it gets. Number 2, the bigger you are, the more cushion you need. Those tiny little skinny pads, when you weigh 200 pounds plus, just don't hold up anymore. And number 3, price. The bigger something gets, in order to keep it ultralight, the more expensive materials people need to use, the more expensive the product gets. So we're here to compare 2 relatively new options on the market. That is the Zoom Ultralight from Big Agnes and the NeoAir Xlite NXT from Thermarest. Now, before I dive into my review, I actually just listened to a podcast the other day, the Go Hunt podcast. I'll link the episode right here, where Trail and Brady spent about an hour diving into their preferences on sleeping pads. And what I found super interesting is that we have almost opposite approaches to sleeping pads. I really respect those guys, but I think this is just another great example of there's not always a right answer when you're preparing for trips into the backcountry, and it's more about finding the system that works for you. So I'm gonna do my best to compare these 2 pieces and let you know which works best for my system, and hopefully give you some insights that will help create your own system that's personalized for you. Now, let me back up a little bit and share my history with sleeping pads, because when I first started going into the backcountry, the original NeoAir Xlite was all the rage. I think it was 12 ounces. It was maybe 1 3/4 inches thick. It sounded like you were sleeping on tinfoil. It was so noisy. I never got a good night's sleep. It was terrible. And then I started finding bigger pads. And the next one I found that I really fell in love with was the Big Agnes Q-Core SLX. Now, there is a whole suite of sleeping pads that fall into that category, but that category is about 24 ounces. You've got the Sea to Summit Etherlight, you've got the Big Agnes Q-Core, now you've got the Big Agnes Rapide SL, you have the XPED Ultra 3 and 4R. Getting a large pad in that 24 to 26 ounces is not a problem. What is a problem is finding a sub 18 ounce sleeping pad that still provides the comfort and the durability that a big guy requires in the backcountry. As far as the testing protocol goes for these 2 sleeping pads, I just spent a week in my guiding territory. I was clearing trail and scouting for goats, bears, and deer. And while I was there, I was sleeping for a week. I took both these pads and I rotated them in camp every other night. So I would have the ability in different camps, in different setups with different temperatures, to really be able to test the comfort and durability in a very head-to-head manner. Now, I did some infield comparisons, which we'll look at in a moment, but first, I want to dive into the specs table just so we have a better context and framework to compare these 2 pads. All right, so let's compare these features head to head. Price, NeoAir $240, Zoom Ultralight $230. The winner is the Zoom, but by $10, so it's really inconsequential. Size, NeoAir Xlite 25 by 77, Zoom 25 by 78. Again, Zoom by a very slim margin. Weight, 17 ounces for the NeoAir, 18 ounces for the Zoom Ultralight. NeoAir wins by a hair there. Thickness, 3 inches for the NeoAir, 3.25 in the body of the pad, and 3.5 on the exterior baffle of the pad for the Zoom Ultralight, giving the edge to the Zoom there. R value, 4.5 for the NeoAir, 4.3 for the Zoom Ultralight. The NeoAir takes that category. Packed size, 4.6 by 11 for the NeoAir and 4.3 by 8.25 to the Zoom. And you can see I've got these both on the table right now. The Thermarest does pack up a little bit skinnier, and if you really wanted to, you could get this shorter and it would be a bit fatter, but the Zoom is definitely, 10, 15% smaller once it's fully packed up than the NeoAir. Noise level, both incredibly low. That was one of the issues. And if I just open this up and even put it right up to the microphone, there's basically no noise whatsoever from the NeoAir, and the old one was unbelievable. And I know some people, like, that's never bothered trail. Fair enough. It was incredibly annoying to me. I hated it. Mummy shape for the NeoAir, and a rectangle shape for the Zoom Ultralight, and I'm going to get into some video comparison footage of that. Now, I gave the edge to the Zoom for that one because I prefer sleeping on a rectangle pad. But this was going to be hyper personal. Some people like mummy pads. Material 30D RIP HT nylon for the NeoAir, and it was impossible to find out the exact material that Big Agnes uses for the Zoom. All it said was a recycled nylon ripstop material. So they didn't give a denier value for that nylon. And once you set these up and you compare the two of them, the material on the Zoom is definitely thinner than the material on the NeoAir. The NeoAir definitely feels more durable than the Zoom. So I'm going to give the edge on material to the NeoAir. They both come included with a pump sack. And I want to talk about that a little bit because it used to be that nobody really used pump sacks. And when they first came out, they were really heavy. But a lot of these newer pads have insulation inside that can be adversely affected by moisture. So if you're actually breathing your condensate-filled air from your lungs into these pads again and again and again, you're going to break down the interior. So I highly recommend using a pump sack. You got to find one of the ultralight ones. Both these pump sacks are like 1 ounce, maybe 2 ounces or something. And they both work extremely well. And I'm just going to give this one a tie. You can fill both these pads up in like easily under a minute with very little effort with these pump sacks. Up next, valve system. Now the valve system in the NeoAir is far superior to the one in the Big Agnes. The Big Agnes has a traditional snap closure. Not only do they tend to leak, they're kind of a pain in the ass to deflate. At least XPED also has this same mechanism, but at least they include a little dongle that you can like kind of slide in and force open the valve so that you can just compress the pad and all the air gets out. With the Zoom as it stands now, you actually have to leave your thumb depressed on the deflation valve while compressing the pad in order to open that valve so that air can escape. The Thermarest is a much more sophisticated, much more durable and reliable valve than the one on the Zoom. And finally, the baffle system. And this is one of the defining characteristics that differentiate these pads from each other. You have a horizontal baffle system in the NeoAir, and you have basically an X pattern, which is like primarily a vertical baffle system with these kind of staggered dots throughout so that it gives you this more textured baffle than the NeoAir does. So basically out of 11 categories, the Zoom wins 6, the NeoAir wins 4, and we had 1 tie. So now that we have a comprehensive overview of both pads, let's jump out into the field and look at the footage I recorded while I was out there. But before we do that, I'd mentioned I was scouting while I was in my hunting territory, and I found a massive black bear up in the Alpine. This guy's a 7-footer all day. Now, I still have 1 opening for a fall black bear hunt this year in my territory. It's the first week of September. We can do a combination of drifting a river that the salmon are going to be running on for really big black bears, or we can head up into the Alpine and chase bears like the one I was able to find last week. Also, I have 2 spots open for archery mule deer in Alberta, and I have 1 spot that I've opened up for any weapon mule deer here in British Columbia. So if you're interested in any of those hunts, or if you want any more information about Mindful Hunter outfitting, contact me directly, jay@mindfulhunter.com. So here is the NeoAir laid out on top of the Zoom. And you can see a little bit of corner on each end, but other than that, almost identical. And I want to give you a side-by-side shot here of the thicknesses. You can see that the Zoom, I think the Zoom has a 1/2 inch more thickness on the outer baffles, but the interior is the exact same on both. So fundamentally, you would think there's not a big difference. Now I'm going to hop on each pad and show you where functionally there are some differences. All right, so this is me on the Zoom, 6'1", finally lost some weight, clocking in at about 224 right now.
Got about 2 or 3 inches underneath my feet and another like single baffle, so maybe 2-3 inches above my head. And you'll notice both my arms lay flat, and this larger exterior baffle kind of like scoops my body towards the middle and keeps my arms here. But nothing is touching the ground. This is a little overinflated right now for how I would actually sleep on it. I would normally let about 15 to 20% of the air out just to make it a little more cushiony, but fits really nice. Okay, now NeoAir Xlite. Okay, length is the exact same. You can see 2 inches at the bottom, 2 inches on the top, not bad at all. Now here's where for me, the NeoAir doesn't function quite as well as the Zoom, and I'll show you why. So when I put my hands at the side, see how, like, and I know that doesn't seem like much, but oh my God, is it annoying. And it happens more than once, because the other thing, if one of your feet kind of falls to the side, you kind of get this stuff happening. And when I side sleep, I am normally trying to like do something with this arm, and having the baffles roll to the outside like this either kind of makes my ass feel like it's gonna fall off this way. And again, I would deflate this a little more. I'm trying to exaggerate the effect. But because of the horizontal baffles and the mummy shape, like these two variables kind of combine to exacerbate the effect, but it creates this sloping towards the outside. Again, I think if you were like 2 inches shorter, it wouldn't be as much of a deal, or a little less broad across the shoulders, but there are a ton of benefits of the NeoAir. At this point in the review, I'm still deciding. I want to do a little bit more testing about which one I like more, because even though I just pointed out this functional difference, there is, how can I describe this? It is easier with the NeoAir to deflate it to just the right amount where you can side sleep and your hip doesn't touch the ground, but it's not overinflated. And I believe that's because the air can't go hide in the corners like it can with a rectangular pad. If you deflate the Zoom just like 2% too much, it's all of a sudden your ass is on the ground and you're not comfortable. Where that is crazy hard to do with the NeoAir. Like I had to keep letting air out, keep letting air out, keep letting air out, and I was still like getting a really good sleep and nothing was touching the ground. So it's not, both of these pads have their kind of pros and cons, but I'll do a more structured conversation about that and give you my final recommendations back in the studio.
All right, so there you go. We've looked at a little in-studio data about the two pads. We had a look at some in-field footage and my personal experience with both those pads. And now that we've done that, what are my final thoughts and recommendations? The Zoom is slightly larger than the NeoAir, but only 1 ounce heavier. And I think the way that it makes up that weight is by using a slightly less durable material. You can feel it. It's just not as thick as what's used on the NeoAir. So I think for durability, I have to give the edge to the NeoAir. Also, of all the sleeping pads I've run over the last 10 years, I've only had 3 factory fails, which means fails that had nothing to do with me personally. I've had 1 Big Agnes fail on me. It was a Q-Core SLX. And I've had 2 X-Peds fail on me. I had an Ultra 7R that failed after 2 years. The baffles just let go. And then recently I just purchased an Ultra 1R and it deflated the very first night I filled it up. But I've never had a Thermarest, specifically a NeoAir, fail on me. And I did own one for quite some time. And I know a lot of people, and no one I know is ever having a factory failure from a Thermarest. So again, for durability, I've got to give the edge to Thermarest. Now, apparently what they've started doing with the Zooms is they actually factory test each of the sleeping pads before Big Agnes lets it leave the factory. That being said, because of the larger external baffle and the ability to keep my arms and legs on the pad all night, I definitely sleep marginally better on the Zoom Ultralight. So for me, if you put a gun to my head and said, which one are you taking into the backcountry? I'm taking the Zoom Ultralight. However, the NeoAir was incredibly comfortable as well, and I got to give it the edge for durability. So if those are your priorities and you don't mind a mummy pad, you cannot go wrong with the NeoAir either. Did you find this review helpful? Do you in general appreciate unbiased, non-sponsored gear reviews? If you do, I would really appreciate your support. And the way you do that is you go to mindful-reviews.com. Sign up for one of the subscription plans. There's a fantastic community, lots of great advice. Newcomers are welcome. Feel free to ask any questions that you want. And in addition to that, I've got monthly giveaways for the lifetime members. Also, do you have any experience with any other great sleeping pads that are sub 18 ounces? If so, I'd love to hear about it in the comments section below. And even negative comments, like what do you guys like and what do you guys hate about the sleeping pads that you're currently running? If you could take a moment and like, comment, share, or subscribe, help bump this up in the algorithm, I would greatly appreciate it. And as always, thank you for tuning in.